Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brad from the Ed Army, and welcome you today to this video. So let's talk about the training cards and why you should get them before they break you. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe, guys. Share this to people you want to show it to, but also please enjoy, because I'm trying my best to give more content, and falling back in love with Digimon has been a good thing, at least in terms of the card game, because I still didn't not fall out of love with the actual series and everything else as itself. But before, let's just jump into it. So I'm going to take you guys down a stroll to memory lane, and we're going to focus on probably why we're talking about today. So why are we even talking about this at all? And I'm going to be honest with you, it's so I could save you money and time, because I was one of these people who fell into this situation, and I really don't like it. So let me just tell you guys what happened. So first and foremost, I have to go back in time to when BT6 was about to come out. And we have the structure decks for Gallantmon and Ulforce Vidramon coming out here in the TCG effectively. And we have the situation where all the structure decks came with the memory boosts. So this is their first printing. You could get one of each from your structure deck. So if you bought all four, you'd have a play set of each. So this is important for two reasons. One, a lot of strategies needed some generic consistency, because we were having a problem with Digimon where a lot of strategies were either way too supported in terms of they're just having more efficient ways to play, versus a situation where a lot of these decks were just, I wouldn't say they were unplayable, but they had to focus on playing good stuff. So archetypes hadn't fully broken out. Like, some archetypes were definitely established for sure, but it wasn't as specific as we have it today. So I think back at that time, if anyone remembers, about this is basically Battle of Omni format, or Battle of Omega. I still love that. That sounds so cool. Focusing back into it. Basically, one of the standout, or some of the standouts for that format were obviously Lord Nightmon. We also had Hexablaumon in the background. Greymon Tribal was still extremely powerful for the most part, because, you just had almost limitless Greymon support. So it was very powerful. We had a few other decks that were kind of more tech and niches. I remember the Tactimon decks, like purple. Black Good Stuff was another one, if you guys remember that. I actually remember seeing that and be like, wow. So yeah, and there was Diaboromon, but it was like more of a rogue thing, even though like it had some consistency for its archetype. Where I'm trying to get with this is that when the memory boost came out, it was supposed to basically revolutionize every deck. Every color would now have some more ability to generically search, get to its pieces, and that was true. And this was meant to be more accessible because, you could get them out of the structure deck. So effectively, that was good. So what happened? Why was this a problem? The issue started to come as after the structure decks made their circulations, but more importantly, people forgot you can play 4 copies of the memory boost. So if that's the truth, how many structure decks would you need to own in order to have a playset? That's right, you need 4, or you'd have to buy 4 of the singles. So even though they were widely accessible, people bought them up right away. And after a while, both red and blue memory boosts basically were extremely expensive for a very long, or a relatively long time. We did see reprints eventually, but the point was these were cards that, although they were cheap at one point, they fluctuated between being a card that could be as cheap as like $2 to being a card that was almost as expensive as like $7 to $8 to $9. Now, there's obviously cards that are more expensive than that, but the problem stems from, at least at this time of the game, everybody basically wanted memory boosts. They just essentially helped you out, and we still were in a position where not every color had the best of tamers. So there was tamer imbalance, and a lot of strategies were propelled by their tamers, whereas others were basically, I would say, hindered by the fact they didn't have good tamers. And the memory boost basically supplemented this issue, where they basically allowed you to boost the consistency of a strategy that needed more memory in the form of using their delay effects, but also get to pieces that were very hard to find, because even by Digimon mechanics, by just drawing through Digievolution, it was still way too slow compared to other decks. So we have the situation where everybody needs them, and then we get to the situation I call like the blue hybrid, which is like probably the best example of why this could happen again, is that basically Blue Hybrid just played all the best cards it had access to. You could play Howling Memory Boost, it could play Blue Memory Boost, it could play Davis to search. It basically had the Strabimons as well to do more searching. The point is the deck was uber consistent, ultimately able to get access to memory as quickly as possible, and it was basically just a really strong thing, and it caused Blue Memory Boost to be expensive once again. So moving into, we have the reprints, even the special arts from BT7, which gave us additional memory boosts. Literally, guys, that was one format to one format, and it was still expensive. It did knock down the price a bit, so it was a little bit more affordable, but it was still costing a lot to get access to the memory boost. And originally, they were just meant to be more accessible and playable for everybody. So this is why I want to talk about the training cards, because this is going to be a very similar thing, where at least for right now, they're still stabilizing about the price they should, but this isn't going to last forever. So you need to jump on it as quickly as possible. Starting off with offense and mental, talking about the training cards actually is a little bit unique, because I think the problem is everyone's just looking at them as generically, like maybe with the memory boost. But in this case, with the trainings, they actually offset a lot of the problems some of the colors have. So starting off with offense, why is offense so important for red? When you look at red as a color, one of its biggest problems that it had was the fact that it was unable to effectively deal with the fact that it doesn't have a lot of memory to work with. There's very few red cards that actually gain you memory, or at least focus on memory efficiency. It's mostly just play a card, digivolve, build up these really good inheritables and stacks, really a good Digimon effect, and then work with it, right? But with offense training, it offsets one of the issues that we had, was why people would play something like Gravity Crush, people really needing to see their red tamers. And honestly, was one of the big reasons that for early Digimon, red was so strong, because of it having one of the best tamers with a really good effect in the form of Tai. But more importantly than that, it was the issue that they needed their memory. They really did. Otherwise, like, I guess in this case we could call it Caveman Digimon, which is kind of like a rip-off Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh, where it's like you build your stack quickly and just kind of swing at people. This offsets one of those issues that we had in the past, which was like, if you didn't see your tamer, you were just working with what you got. Because there were some searchers, but there wasn't a lot yet. So you kind of had to work with whatever you had access to. And in the case of offense training for red specifically, this fixes a lot of issues. So one of the things that that obviously shows how broken reduction cost in red is if we look at the BT11 Greymon X, which allows you to reduce the cost by every color on a Digimon for Greymon colors. So basically a 2-colored red in the form of like Metal Greymons, they go down to 1 cost if it's like the alternate cost from BT12. So that was insane, and that's why it ended up being on the restricted list. That's just way too good to have for a lot of decks, and even Shine Greymon would abuse that card. Some decks would play a Greymon low end to get into this card just so that their Rise Greymons would be 2 cost no matter what, which was absolutely insane. So that already shows how powerful it is. But also on top of that, you get to search, and you can grab tamers options if you want. Like, that's just insane. So the fact that this came to red is why it's arguably one of the more powerful ones, because it offsets a lot of the problems and is the reason why people are buying this out. Because obviously, if it's Greymon's main color, you're going to want to buy it. So moving into mental training is absolutely unique for blue specifically, because blue has a lot of ways to gain additional memory. One thing now that I can find that you do is if you brick in a hand and you have a training and something like a Hammer Spark for whatever reason, you can literally just drop the Hammer Spark to gain a memory and pass the memory back to your opponent on 1 by just using the mental training to search. I think that's absolutely nuts now, because you can start doing memory choking immediately if you don't have your pieces, and I still think that's just functionally cool for the game. For mental training, one of the things it offsets for blue is that blue has really had to focus on most of its searchers either inside an archetype or focus on Davis. So they already could deal with the fact that they can search a lot. They have efficiencies to gain back memory with a lot of the cards, depending if it's Source Strip, blue hybrids, or even something like the what's the one I want to talk about? There's something else, but I don't know why it's missing on the top of my tongue. But effectively, you have access to gain memories, and having access to these the mental training in blue is just really good, because it fixes the issues of kind of grabbing maybe the cards you couldn't search, which are like tamers and or option cards. Even the fact that you could grab an ice wall off of this if you really needed it is like kind of funny. So just keep that in mind, guys. Now we're moving into wisdom and defense. They're specifically talked about here quick as maybe the ones you should pick up, because all we keep getting is like more support for Seeker stuff, more support for D Brigade, maybe more support for like black decks in the future, and purple decks as well, because we see the Myotismon stuff like that. So my point is here with wisdom and defense, they're expensive now, specifically because you have a tier 1 strategy in Fenrir Logomon, and you have a arguably like tier 1.5 to 2 deck in the form of the new D Brigade support, which is going to get more. And also this will be important for when we get the remaining X antibody support for like Ryudomon, or even the new stuff that we might be getting for like Dexterugumon if it's coming in the future, stuff like that. So basically what I want to say is it's better you have these than not have them if you're going to play these strategies. So the fact that they're already expensive is like kind of crazy. The fact that Wisdom is like leading the charge and being the most expensive does kind of surprise me, because although I think Fenrir Lugumon is a really good deck, I do think that the other colors are basically going to get more support for their strategies in different typings. So I would rather focus on that. And also, like, for something like Ultimate Cup, a lot of the strategies that are going to be able to use the trainings the best are probably going to be like red and blue specifically. So those are some things you might want to think about. Defense training, though, and talking about the things, purple had no issue with effectively, I think, going for memory, because you had a lot of effects that could like draw one, trash one, and gain memory, stuff like that. But I think purple's biggest problem was its lack of specific searching. So say maybe you wanted the option, maybe you wanted the tamer, maybe you wanted the specific Digimon. Some of your cards would only search it out, and only by having to draw cards, you still have the issue of RNG being in the way where you could keep on drawing, but if you're not getting what you want, it's kind of a waste. So it fixes that issue. Specifically for the black coloring, one of their biggest issues, I think, until like we had X Antibody, was that it was really memory deficient, where it basically focused on having good defensive effects, but you weren't able to really maximize them as much as possible, because other decks can just play around you being defensive. Well, with defense training, one of your advantages is that now you have access to speed up the game, because only, I think, Alphamon was one of the very few decks that in the black color could take advantage of being able to go extremely quickly with its memory efficiency, just because Oryuken could reset it, you had access to memory boost. Yuji and Koda were able to just give you the memory you needed, and basically you were cycling memory in with your Digimon, so you were able to take care of that issue. But with the defense trainings, you're now able to kind of offset that issue as well, where now you can get access to whatever you need, and slowly bring your deck forward. So even for like those people that play like Enamon, Sukamon, stuff like that, I give you guys a thumbs up. This is going to help, because it's going to be able to let you dig into the pieces you need, because you're going to be missing a lot with like memory boost. Because if you had to play memory boost, usually you're doing yellow and or black, so you specifically have to take things with defense training. Since most of your top end is going to be black anyways, it's going to really help out with that, and making those evolution costs from like King Edamon to like 2, and even like Metal Edamon to like 1 is like really good. So moving into the two trainings that are seeing the least amount of movement right now in agility and physical, I actually am surprised physical isn't more expensive than it is, because physical really does help out yellow decks a ton. And one of these reasons is that yellow is usually focused on a security manipulation in the form of like TK. Also, with certain strategies, allowing you to look through your security to find pieces. We've seen that be a thing. Now, with physical, one of the things that's really interesting is that now you could look at the top of your deck, see what you want, take what you want, and then effectively when you are going to like bottom deck it, it doesn't really matter, because at least you got to see 2 cards. Usually when you're blind recovering, you're not seeing your cards as much. But with physical, it gives you a low cost to see the deck, that what you would search, and kind of like sculpt it out. I don't think you would ever like deck out in yellow unless like someone's trying to mill you out. But one of the advantages now you have is that in theory, I think there's a yellow build that could kind of like quickly go through its deck and kind of like restack. I don't think it'd ever get to the bottom unless the deck is grinding out, but you could actually do that if you want. And specifically for yellow, I think it's one of the decks that has had an issue only in maybe having effective, no, I would say effective searching, where a lot of times you do have cards that search like Patamons, but they've never really focused on pushing past certain archetypes. So generic searching is something that's not relatively brand new, because we had yellow memory boost, but it does help in the fact that a lot of the different yellow strategies that do exist can take advantage of the physical training, because they do have somewhat high cost evolutions. I think about the new Seraphimon that has a really high evolution cost at 4, you can now bring that down to 2. I think about something like Pulsemon, who happens to be in the art of all of the trainings, funny enough, has a high evolution cost for Kazuchimon specifically, being usually 5, unless you can reduce it down with like Boutmon and the other ones. But by making that possibly free, that is actually really, really good. Also, anything that comes in the future, in the yellow coloring, we have a few decks, so this may or may not help. I think the problem is with something like Animal Coliseum, we're going to see a lot of like color blending for some of the strategies, so it does kind of not help. But hey, we got to work with what we got. Now, moving into agility training, which is the last one. Funny enough, agility training is here mostly to help green search, because green has had a interesting relationship with searching. A lot of decks would use the memory boost to dig because that's what they had, or they had in archetype searchers for different Digimon, which is what they would use. However, one of the things that they were missing was searching stuff for maybe their tamers, digging for options for like HPD, which is like really nuts, but now they can effectively get access to it if they really wanted to. Agility training's advantage for specifically green is that it does allow you to focus more on maybe playing less of the cards you didn't want to play before. Like a lot of times I would see green decks struggle to like bring in copies of something like Davis just so that they had additional searchers that was a memory fixer. One of the advantages you have with the agility training is that now you don't really have to worry about having to see the tamers to get you access to your engines, maybe. What you can do instead is use the agility training to dig deep and also kind of mimic a little bit of that Digisorption effect that you had, where you could reduce the cost to Digivolve less. So you do have access to that in the form of the trainings. But I do think that you kind of have to mix match of where you want to use it, because green is one of these decks where infamous for always having low cost but less power. Now you have access to reduce the cost you need even further so you could dig deeper. So I honestly think agility training is probably undervalued. But if you're not going to play green, I wouldn't pick it up personally. The only deck I'm really going to see that's going to take advantage of this, probably for Ultimate Cup specifically, and kind of like what I'll say for physical training as well. For the Ultimate Cup decks, if you're going to play an Ulti Cup, keep in mind you're locked into like a lot of different strategies. So yellow is going to be able to use this obviously because vaccine isn't going to be, it's not going to be the best deck, but it's definitely going to be playable. However, for green, once we get Animal Coliseum, I do think the best deck that's going to be playable is going to be Leomon, believe it or not. And the only reason I'm leaning on Leomon to be one of the best decks is that's going to be the most composed of all the archetype decks outside of like Greymon and like kind of Fenrir Lugomon. But my biggest problem for Fenrir Lugomon in Ultimate Cup is that it's severely handicapped because it lacks a lot of the good dark animal support that it needs. Like there's no black Tailmon except for the one that's from Ghost Game, and it doesn't support it in the same way. Also, they won't have access to certain abilities to like just keep on drawing and milling as well. They're gonna have to basically miss out on analog youth. So Ultimate Cup people who are listening to me, all of this is a little bit different. So some of the decks like for red and blue slots are obviously going to be the most powerful. For yellow, for purple and black, it's not looking as much. I think unfortunately if you're going to play Ultimate Cup with black coloring, you're basically forced to play good stuff black cards. And that's not bad, or maybe Monzemon, but personally if you're going to play Monzemon, it's hard. I would say probably use physical training instead, just to be honest. It would be better because you could have access to certain tamers like TK. And yeah, basically that's what we have here for those. And yeah, this discussion actually ended up being longer than I thought because training cards actually have a lot of little intricacies that we want to talk about. But specifically for you guys watching, I would say pick them up while you have the opportunity. It's best to have these cards that are generic before they go up in price, and I don't want you costing an arm and a leg. I would put this under the How to Budget series, but I mean, to be honest, I'm not really teaching you guys how to budget. It's just picking it up before it gets expensive, so I'm not going to put it there. But basically, get them while you have the chance. It's better you have the training cards than not have them. And ultimately, that's all I've got for you today, guys. So if you liked the video, drop a like down, have a comment as well if you don't agree, or maybe you do agree with me, but ultimately suggest what you guys want to see. I'm also trying to pump out what I can and show you guys that there is some interesting stuff that can still be had on the Ad Army. And don't forget, you can add yourself here. So as always, I'm Brad from the Ad Army signing off. And for all of you out there, to sign on.